Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to the Daily Arsenal and Daily West Ham podcast, brought to you as part of the Global Sports Podcast Network. It's Thursday, which of course means it is time for a crossover. It's been a while since at least we've done one of these on a Thursday because the schedule has been so crazy. They've happened on Tuesdays and Wednesdays all over the place. So it's good to get back to a crossover Thursday. I'm your host, Josh Vince from the Daily Arsenal podcast, and joining me from the Daily West Ham podcast, we have the Elkins brothers of both Tom and Jacob. Gents, I didn't even realise when we were setting this up that you were brothers. It's great to have you on. Tom, how have you both been recently? You've been keeping well? You've been enjoying the football?
Yeah, been doing really well. We're actually not brothers. We just happen to have the same, relatively unique surname. So,
damn it! You tricked me, you fool!
No. We are brothers. We're definitely brothers. West Ham brothers. So
yeah,
it's been, quite an interesting time recently. A lot of ups, but then more recently some lows. So, but we're keeping okay generally.
Yeah, it's been an interesting season for you guys. Jacob, how have you found things sort of going forward? And let's say since the new year kicked in.
That is a really hard one to answer. It's been a bit of a roller coaster, I would say. It's not all been positive, but certainly since the turn of the year, it's been going in the right direction, I think. And yeah, I think we're just kind of hoping we're going to start to put some results together. We're happy with the new manager, so yeah, we're trying to be positive, I think, at the minute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely been a tricky one for you guys. Certainly, it's been a very up and down season. I mean, so as things stand, Arsenal are second with 53 points, and West Ham sitting 16th with 27. So that's 10 above the relegation zone, and you've taken 9 points out of a potential 30 in the last 10 games. Is there sort of Tom, as sort of Jacob alluded to, are there slight concerns going forward at the moment in terms of the form, or do you see the sort of change in playing style is starting to kick in under Potter?
Yeah, I definitely think the playing style is starting to kick in. When you look at how poor we were under Lopetegui, I think the most telling thing was how poorly we started in the beginning of games. Very rarely did we score the first goal. We would concede really early, and then from there we made it so difficult for ourselves. That, coupled with the problems we've had with injuries and attack, we've never really been blessed with luck when it comes to buying strikers, but when we consistently have injuries to the strikers that we do have, Fulkrug signed with quite a large amount of hype around him, basically got injured straight away, hasn't really played any decent amount of minutes consistently. So it's just been tough. Now that we've got the new manager, we've got Evan Ferguson as a striker who hopefully can stay fit, it's looking more positive, and I think we are going in a positive direction. It's just, are we going to be able to actually get anything out of this season? At this point, probably not, to be honest.
Jacob, I know this is potentially slightly hyperbolic, and I mean when we saw on the Daily Arsenal Lopetegui came in as West Ham manager, we thought, oh, okay, brilliant manager. This is going to be a really good season for West Ham. So, is it hyperbolic to say you're in a relegation fight at this point?
I think when you see that we're in 16th, obviously that your mind goes to, we're clinging on, but I think we've got just enough of a gap between us and the teams below to feel relatively comfortable. I think things would have to go really against us, and then the teams below us would have to pick up every point, and I don't think that's going to happen. And I think it's just gonna end up being one of those seasons where we just have to sort of forget and try and move on, and move on to better things next season. I wouldn't say we're worried too much. We kind of know the situation we're in, and we just kind of have to deal with it. Any higher that we can finish up the table will be brilliant, but we are where we are. We have to take every game as it comes now and try and salvage as much as possible.
Yeah, I can imagine you'd see this sort of as a transitional season. Sort of, there's been a lot of change at the club. There's lots of things that have happened as well. When we look back to Arsenal versus West Ham, I mean, we look at 2024 just as a year. The aggregate score in the Premier League between Arsenal and West Ham was 11-2 to Arsenal. It wasn't a fixture that blessed you necessarily in the previous year. And when we look back to the actual game this season at the London Stadium, 5-2. Tom, do you remember watching that game? Because I have to admit, I certainly do.
It was just so. It's the typical case study for the Lopetegui. Actually, apart from the goals were probably slightly surprising when it comes to Lopetegui, to be honest, because we were very rarely scoring in the first half and we were conceding so many goals early. So the kind of defensive capitulation that we saw, just scoring repeatedly, like so quickly after the last, so demoralizing. Like especially when you're trying to stay positive about a new manager, and I think the general talk was what basically we had the best window is what people were saying. So to then see it slowly just start to spiral downwards is a really tough position to be as a fan, to try and stay positive, especially when we're talking about it. We do a podcast about West Ham, so trying to stay positive and upbeat about what's happening when we're seeing really poor performances when we're expecting so much. It's tough, but that's just kind of the life of most football fans. Like most football fans support a team that isn't really that great, but you just hope that it's going to get better. And we've seen so much success from West Ham recently. We've competed in Europe, won European silverware. So I feel like it's kind of slightly coming back down to reality, having a bit of a reset, and hopefully under Potter we'd be able to push forward into Europe like we thought we'd be able to do with Lopetegui.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I can definitely see you doing it. You've got a strong enough squad. And on the point you made there, Tom, a question for you, Jacob, that I have is, so you said, Tom, and I think a lot of people agree that West Ham had a brilliant summer transfer window. It was really, really strong. Jacob, out of that sort of crop of players that you got in, which are the ones that have sort of haven't necessarily hit the ground running as much as you might have hoped for? Because I'd argue possibly Wan-Bissaka has been probably one of the best standouts that you brought in potentially. But are there any others that sort of obviously Fulkrug was injured, but are there others that are disappointed?
Yeah, I wouldn't say out of them all, I wouldn't say I'm that disappointed. I mean, the main one that stands out would be Rodriguez, who, it seemed like a strange one at the time when we let Ward-Prowse go out on loan to Forest, and then we brought in Rodriguez to act as sort. I don't know if that was the idea of him being sort of Ward-Prowse's replacement or Ward-Prowse being sort of surplus to requirements under Lopetegui. It just seemed crazy, but we kind of went along with it and thought this guy's been in a World Cup winning squad, so he's got what we need. Other than that, you think of Somerville, he's been in and out of the team, had injury issues, not really had enough of a chance to show what he can do, like we've seen for Leeds in the Championship. Kilman and Wan-Bissaka have been solid, but our defence in general has leaked goals. So I don't think it's really fair to pin that on them. I think just in general, the way the team's been set up in the past it's just been wrong, and I think they can only get better. Kilman looks very dependable. We're very happy with him. Me and Tom have spoken many times about how he's kind of been a shining light in a struggling West Ham. So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm that disappointed. I think I think it's fair to say we had the best transfer window, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were set up in the right way, or the manager's message wasn't strong enough, or because I think had it have been Potter from the start, it would probably look very different now, to be honest.
Yeah, most likely. Well, we're going to take a little break. We're going to hear from our partners at Bionic. And when we come back, we're going to I've got a few questions for the Elkins boys from the Arsenal side to West Ham. And then in part 3, they're going to reverse and ask any questions they have of the mighty Arsenal. Sorry, boys. Right, we'll be back just after this break.
Your body is unique. And Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bionique, the world's most personalised supplements. Bionique provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bionique. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
And welcome back to the Daily Arsenal and Daily West Ham podcast. I mean, GSPN 2025, use that code 40% off. It's a pretty decent deal. Now, Tom, the first question that I have to ask is actually one that sort of when it occurred, we on the Arsenal podcast were incredibly worried and quite moved by it. Antonio obviously had a horrific incident earlier this year in that car crash. All fans were with him in that instance. I don't think anybody had anything negative to say about the man in that moment at all. First of all, have we heard any update on how he's doing? And then secondly, do you think that might have impacted the squad sort of psychologically, perhaps?
So the first thing to say about that is that he is okay, and the fact that he was okay. If you see some of the images of the wreckage, it's amazing that he got out with kind of as minimal injuries as he did, to be honest. And I think there's not too many people that I would kind of think that would happen with, and Antonio is definitely one of them, because he is such a... You look at his physical makeup, and he is an absolute monster. You know, he's built so rock solid, and he's muscular, he's athletic, and I think hopefully that when he does come back, he'll be able to regain that, because that's one of his best assets, and I think that's one of the reasons he's been such a prolific player in the Premier League. I don't think he gets the respect that he deserves, because he scored a lot of goals in the league, and it takes... You can't consistently play in the Premier League if you're not a good player, and he's scored goals in the Premier League. He's scored a lot more goals than a lot of people would actually realise. So we've been big fans of his for a long time. And then the impact on the squad, it's a weird one. It felt like, typical, something like this happens. Like, we're in such a kind of down and relatively somber mindset generally from how the season has gone. We're not in the league position that we want to be. We want to be competing for Europe, and we're competing for top 10, which is really poor. And at this point, it's like competing not to be in the relegation battle, it's just not good enough. So I think it was something that felt just typical. When you support West Ham for a long time, you know that there's going to be ups and there's also going to be downs. So it was kind of okay, this is happening now, and it's just stuff you have to just deal with. And Antonio is now training in Dubai. I've seen pictures of him doing some kind of strength and conditioning work. I don't think it's anything too crazy, but he is back training and rehabilitating, which is amazing to see. And I don't know if it'll be this season. I don't think it will be this season, but I think at the start of next season here, he'll be ready to go, which is really good. And we could use him. I think his profile as a footballer is so unique. I don't think there's too many people that are similar to him. His kind of raw athleticism and the way that he kind of is so... I think he must be really difficult to play against, especially as a defender, because his technique isn't typical. He is not a really refined, beautiful, silky footballer. He's like raw, and he's aggressive, and he's powerful, and he's so direct as well. And I've seen so many times that he outmuscles defenders and he outpaces them, and then he can just spin a centre back and smash it in the top bins as well, which is something that I don't think people give him credit for. So yeah, I just hope we get him back soon, and hopefully that can kind of galvanise the squad as we start to see him rehabilitate, basically.
Okay, cool. And Jacob, I mean, we've obviously talked about Antonio, and I have to say, Tom, I was genuinely amazed when you said that he's already in training. That's really good news to hear. Jacob, in the winter transfer window, you brought in Duncan Ferguson, a man who a lot of teams had their eye on. What did you make of that loan signing?
I think there was a few other players that I think I probably would have picked over Ferguson, but maybe somebody with I know we have a habit of signing players who are a little bit past it, but I maybe would have liked someone with a little more experience playing in, top division. But we've seen him score goals in the Premier League, and it's exciting. When he came on in our most recent game, he had an immediate impact, and he basically has to start for us now because we don't really have an option. We looked so poor in the last game going forward without a centre forward, and someone like him who's quick and athletic and has a real presence is what we need right now. So yeah, I'm just kind of excited to see what he can bring. Me and Tom have kind of tried to predict how many goals we think we can realistically expect from him, and we've said we'd be happy with 5 or 6 or 7 maybe. That might even be a bit generous, but yeah, he's of that caliber. I think he could have an impact, and I think he's got a point to prove. Being out of that Brighton team, and I'm sure he will have his impact.
Yeah, I'll be honest. When you sort of said guessing how many goals, I imagined about 6. So if he gets 6, I think that'd be a good return for half a season. Honestly, that'd be a really good return. Tom, this is the last question I have for you before we go to a break. What went wrong with Lopetegui? Because from the outside looking in, that was an amazing bit of business, but it did not work out, did it? My word.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's one that we've spoken about so much. Honestly, it's trying to actually put your finger on what wasn't working is really tough because, like you mentioned, on the surface, it seemed like a relatively good managerial appointment. He has decent pedigree. Obviously, he did amazing things at Sevilla for a long time. Honestly, I don't know. I don't have one straight answer for you. On paper, everything looked really good. We had, coming off of the back of probably one of the most successful times in the club's history with European success, it was having a good squad and signing good players, and kind of we've managed to get a load of players that in previous seasons we probably wouldn't have been able to attract, like your Kuduses or your Paquetas, who are definitely Champions League level players. They just are. Kudus is, I think, probably for me like one of the best left wingers in the league, and I think Paqueta is a really unique player who has so much skill and is able to do such a wide variety of things that he would be a valuable asset for basically any team. So when it comes to what specifically went wrong, I don't know, to be honest with you. I just don't think that Lopetegui was able to get the players to do what he wanted. I don't know whether that's to do with the squad or that's to do with his ability as a coach. I don't know. And the one thing that I think it is important to mention is that David Moyes did really well, obviously, but if you do want to make the step up to consistently play in Europe, then you can't really get any long-term success playing the way that David Moyes plays, because you see all of the teams that do well in Europe now, they play it on the front foot, they want the ball and they want to go and score goals, but as a David Moyes team, he doesn't really want to do that. He wants to kind of absorb the pressure and then break on the counter-attack, which is really good in short amounts of time, and I think we got the most out of that. But in order to make that step up, you need to make the managerial change to try and make that happen. And we took a risk and it didn't pay off. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the decision to make that risk was wrong. It just didn't work. And sometimes it just doesn't work. Like, you'd much rather make the risk than just keep Moyes and we kind of continue to do well, but never really push on to what we want to be and what we want to be as a European team. So just the wrong appointment, but the right decision to appoint him, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I totally get it. And I get where you're coming from as well. Like, sometimes you just have to take that leap. We look at Emery exactly the same way. Good manager, great pedigree. We took a chance on him. It didn't work out, but it actually led on to better things with the next managerial appointment, and it laid the foundation of where the team needed to improve. So those periods of difficulty can definitely give you sort of a place to grow from. which hopefully, because I know you're a London team, but I quite like West Ham. I ain't got anything against you guys. You're not Spurs after all, so you're good in my books. So yeah, I'd like to see you doing well, and you are a team that should be aiming for Europe. You're right. You're at that point. You've got the history. You should be aiming for European football. Right, we're going to take a little break now. Our last break. We're going to hear from our partners at Zencastr, and when we come back, it's time for the Elkinses to grill the Daily Arsenal podcast. We'll be back just after this break. Here at Global Sports Podcast Network, we spend a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. And welcome back to this final part of this crossover Thursday between Arsenal and West Ham here on the Global Sports Podcast Network. It's the third section, and it's time for the boys, if they have any questions about Arsenal, to ping them my way. So Jacob, we'll start with you. What would you like to know about Arsenal as we stand at the moment?
This might come across as a bit of a question that you might not want to face, but it's something I've been thinking for a while, because I've been seeing a lot of people say that they think that this is an actual title race, but I am struggling to see from my perspective that this is a title race. I don't know what you think about that. I just think Liverpool have got that comfortable gap between you, and I just want to know if you think it is actually realistic, and you're gonna, hopefully squeeze that gap, particularly with the forward issues you're having.
Yeah, that certainly hasn't helped the mood. Let's put it that way. Even before we had the injuries, it was a mountain to climb. It was always going to be an incredibly difficult challenge. They had the game in hand. Thankfully, they didn't win it. I think if they won it, then it's impossible, because I don't see them dropping 9 points for the rest of the season. They've got some tough games, Liverpool. There's no denying that. They've got Villa tonight. We're recording this on Wednesday. They play Villa in 25 minutes at Villa Park. That could be a tough game for them. They've not looked fantastic recently, but you can't deny they're still eking out victories. So I'm not necessarily sure I can see them dropping 7 points. Likewise, now we've had these injuries up front, and we're relying on Mikel Merino as our number 9. I see us dropping points. If I'm being brutally honest, I don't think we'll win every game. And if we're going to beat Liverpool to this title, we have to win every single game. And frankly, as much as, it's the Arsenal podcast, but I've got to be honest, I don't think we're going to win the Premier League this year. However, I have said since the start of the season, I think, now this is going to sound potentially ridiculous to you guys, I think we could be contenders for the Champions League. That's where I see us.
I think this season it's going to be more difficult for you to win the league than it is the Champions League. I actually agree with you, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. Because we seem to have an element of form going into Europe, and the way that Arteta plays suits European football as well. It suits going up against those European sides. It's the teams. To be honest, even though the last results from 2024 don't necessarily show it, like West Ham, like Newcastle, like Brighton, they're the teams that give us difficulty. Technically good, but really stubborn teams as well. Whereas you go into Europe and it's all flair. It's all, brilliant. And that is something that Arteta can work around. So I genuinely think that's a possibility, maybe. Tom, is there anything you'd like to know about Arsenal at the moment in our current state?
Yeah, I think... Obviously, there's a lot of discussion around him generally. Kai Havertz. The way that I view him is that he's really good at football. He's really good at football. But, is he that great of a football player in any specific position? Because to me, it seems like I don't think that he has made you a better team. I think there's other players that could have come in and would have improved you a lot more. And when you look at the signing, it was, we're going to try and take a guy who didn't do very well at Chelsea and try and develop him into this unbelievable player. And I think he is a really good player. I don't think he's a bad player at all. It's just, how long can you be in a team not really having a set position that you make your own before you start to go, maybe he isn't a kind of overall benefit to the team, if that makes sense? Because he's not a striker. I don't think he's a striker at all. He's not clinical enough at finishing. So then where does he play, and how do you kind of get the most out of him? Is that even possible? I'm not even sure if it is, to be honest.
I think the way that you put that there is the best I've heard anybody put it, is that he's good at football, but you don't know where. I think that sums him up perfectly. He's not a number 9. My word, we've discussed this enough. His finishing lacks consistency and finesse in almost every respect. He scores goals that he should score. He scores goals that any player should score. But he does... What I find with Kai is he's a great presser, and he's relatively good at linking the play up as well. But like you say, Tom, there are other players who could do that and probably could do that better. And we've heard reports as well that in the summer, we were very, very close to signing Benjamin Sesko, who I think would be a brilliant centre-forward for the team that we have at the moment. But he said no, because he was going to play second fiddle to Kai Havertz. And I think when you're putting that sort of message out there, that a young, established, exciting centre-forward isn't going to start above somebody who can't, you're right, who's playing as a number 9, but isn't one, and can't find a space in midfield where he's supposed to be, it's the wrong signs that we're sending out, especially for any potential strikers. I think that Arteta might have learned that lesson this season, because obviously we went in for Ollie Watkins. 60 million for him, I think, was a bit extreme, personally. He's a good player, but nowhere near that much money. In the summer, I can see him amending that. I think he has to. If he doesn't, then I don't see him lasting another year, if he doesn't take that gamble. Oh, yeah, it's... Kai's a funny one. Kai's a funny old player. I like him, but he's not... And there seems to be a bit of a habit with Arteta as well of bringing in players who aren't doing very well at other clubs. So you can take Gabriel Jesus and Zinchenko at City. They were struggling. He brought them in. They did elevate the club at that point, because we weren't a title contender. We were sort of 6th, 8th consistently. They elevated the squad. He did the same with Sterling as well, and that did not work this season. We had a whole deep dive on Tuesday. So there seems to be a habit of him thinking he can fix players. And with Kai Havertz, he's been better, but he's not been fixed, I don't think. I think that's the best way.
I've got a kind of analogy that I thought of a while ago that it's not very good, but it kind of illustrates the point quite well. It's, imagine you pull the kitchen drawer open and you've got your kind of staple implements. You know, you've got a spoon, a fork, knife, whatever. Kai Havertz is a really nicely polished, really heat resistant, really unbendable lump of metal that has all the characteristics of being really good in the kitchen, but when you want to cut something, he's not really that good at cutting something. If you want to try and get something out of a pot, he's not really that good at that either. So it's like, on paper, it looks really good, but if you want to pick something up with a fork, you get a fork. You don't try and make do with something that isn't a fork. And the fork might not be as good as the piece of nice, really expensive, high-quality metal, but sometimes you just need a fork. So I think...
Yeah.
I just don't think it's good for Arsenal as a team to try and keep pushing him into positions where he isn't good enough. It's like, you either pick a position and he's good enough or he's not, or you move him on, because he's currently just kind of floating around and being okay and having good patches and having bad patches, but not really giving any sort of consistent performances. So I just don't think it's a good thing that he isn't trying to be one thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, but he's not something we have to worry about anymore because he's injured for the rest of the season. So, and coming on from that, it is almost the end of the podcast, and it's time to ask, realistically, lads, the only important question that we have here. What are your predictions? Jacob, we'll start off with you. How do you see this one going at the Emirates on Saturday at 3:00?
I think that I don't think it's going to be another 5-2. That's for sure. I don't think at as things stand, I might jinx it, but I don't think there are 5 goals that are going to come from Arsenal. I know there's still serious threats with the likes of Gabriel and Waneri, but I think I could realistically see like a 2-2. I think there's parts of both of our games that are suffering at the moment, and it might be a little bit optimistic from me, but I do this every week, and then I'm either pleasantly surprised or I'm like, yeah, we kind of knew that was going to happen. So I'll go with a 2-2, and I'd be
Jacob,
pretty
there's
chuffed with
nothing
that,
wrong
to
with
be
being an
honest.
optimist at all. Tom, what about yourself?
Well, if you think Jacob's been an optimist, so for me, I think the first half is unbelievably important for this game, because if we do what we have done so often, whereas we concede early, I really don't see us getting anything out of the game. Going away to the Emirates is a difficult place to go at the best of times. So if we concede early, it's going to be such an uphill battle, and I just don't see us turning it over. But if we can be defensively solid, frustrate Arsenal in the first half, I think then as you get into the second half, the further on we get, I think the more pressure is put on the Arsenal team, because West Ham are a team that most teams think they should be beating. And if they're at home, if it gets to like the 60th, the 70th minute, and they still haven't scored, and obviously still having all of these striker issues, not really having someone to lead the line and to get the goals for you, I think that works in our favour massively. Evan Ferguson is such a good striker as well, and I hope that this is his opportunity to be like, right, they don't even have a striker. I am a striker. I'm going to drag our team to some points. So my head would go 2-0 to Arsenal. I think you probably score really early in the first half, probably get another one in the second. Not a very happy day for us. But if I'm going with my heart, I think 1-0 West Ham, goal in the after 70 minutes, Evan Ferguson gets it. I'm real keen for West Ham.
Do you know what, Tom? I hate to do this, but I don't entirely disagree with you on your heart. I think that Arsenal are really going to struggle in terms of getting a goal against West Ham. I really do. And I'm going to go 1-0, but I don't know which way to do it. Honestly, it's the honest truth. I don't know which way it's going to swing. I'm going to say Arsenal because I'm representing the Daily Arsenal podcast on this occasion. But it is one of those games where we will not score. If we score in the first half, I'll be really surprised. I'll be really surprised if we score in the first half. We really, really struggled in our last game to get a goal. And unless something magical happens and Marino turns into, I don't know, prime Benzema or something like that, then I think we're really going to struggle against you. So I'm going to go 1-0. I'm going to say Arsenal. But, I think it could go either way. And that is it for today. Thank you all so much for listening, both from the Daily Arsenal and from the Daily West Ham podcast. I've been your host, Josh Vince. They were Tom Elkins and Jacob Elkins. Thank you so much for coming along, lads. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. And in the nicest way possible, worst of luck for Saturday. I hope it goes terrible. I hope you have a terrible Saturday. And from us, both these podcasts, thank you very much for listening. Stay safe. And until our next episodes, goodbye.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.